Chapter 1: A Wish in the Night. Fiona Ellwood had always believed that wishes were for children and dreamers, that they were simply fleeting thoughts whispered into the dark, never to be realized. But in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, when the weight of the day had been lifted, and the world outside her window had quieted, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to escape. Life had never been easy, not in the way she'd always hoped it would be. There had been brief moments of joy, sunsets over the lake, laughter with friends, fleeting kisses beneath the stars. But those moments had always been shadowed by the looming presence of something darker. Betrayal. The kind that comes from those you trust the most. Tonight, the betrayal felt fresh. Her heart was still raw, the scars of the past year bleeding again. Fiona sat on the edge of her bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out of the window. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft silver glow over the quiet city. A cool breeze rustled the trees in the distance, and she thought she could almost hear the whispers of the night beckoning her to leave, to run far away from everything that had hurt her. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder that the world outside still continued on, unaware of the turmoil brewing inside her. She ignored it. She'd spent too many nights hoping for answers, for apologies, for something that could heal the deep wound in her chest. But there would be no solace tonight. Not here. Not in this place. Maybe a wish wouldn't hurt, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the hum of the city. She had nothing left to lose. A part of her knew it was foolish, ridiculous even, but in the depths of her despair, it seemed the only thing she could cling to. Closing her eyes, Fiona took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her mind drifted back to childhood memories. Nights spent lying on the grass, staring up at the stars, and wishing for things that felt impossible. She used to believe in magic back then, when life hadn't yet shown her how cruel the world could be. "I wish," she murmured. "I wish I could escape. I wish I could leave all of this behind." The words hung in the air for a moment, as if the very night itself had heard her plea. She opened her eyes, but nothing had changed. The stars still twinkled in their usual patterns, the moon casting its gentle light over the earth. It was just a wish, a fleeting thought lost in the vastness of the universe. But something shifted in that moment. Something deep inside her heart stirred, a faint ripple of possibility, as if the world around her was shifting ever so slightly. Fiona looked down at her hands, the familiar weight of her grief pressing down on her chest. But even as the sorrow tried to reclaim her, there was a faint pull, a tugging at the edges of her consciousness. The air grew heavier, charged with a strange energy. A cold shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't the breeze from the open window that chilled her, but something else, something far older, deeper. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever felt, as though the very fabric of reality had momentarily unraveled. She stood, her heart racing, looking around her room. The walls seemed to warp slightly, as though the edges of her world were starting to bend. Before she could react, the room darkened. The lights flickered, and the air became thick with a presence that seemed both ancient and otherworldly. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through her bones. Fiona took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. From the shadows of her room, a figure emerged. It was unlike anything she could have imagined. Tall, draped in robes of shadow, with eyes that glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light. A man, no, not just a man, something more, stood before her, his presence overwhelming, as though the very space around him bent to his will. His features were sharp, yet somehow timeless, his face both impossibly young and impossibly old at once. Fiona's breath hitched as she stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest. "Fiona Ellwood," the figure spoke, his voice low and melodic, like the sound of wind sweeping through ancient trees. "Your wish has been heard." Her heart skipped a beat. "What? Who are you?" The figure's smile was like a blade, cool and distant, yet laced with something akin to pity. "I am Cassian," he said simply, as if his name alone should have meant something to her. "And I am here to fulfill your wish." Fiona's mind raced, her thoughts spinning as she tried to comprehend what was happening. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. But the man before her, this Cassian, felt as tangible as the floor beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" Fiona asked, her voice shaking. "I didn't. This isn't real." "You're not real." Cassian took a step forward, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with an unearthly energy. "You wished to escape, did you not?" he asked, his voice cool, his eyes never leaving hers. "You wished to leave behind your world of pain and betrayal. And so, I offer you an escape, a choice." Fiona's mind was a whirl of confusion. What was he saying? Escape. A choice. Cassian's expression softened, though there was something in his gaze that remained unreadable, as if he was watching her every move, waiting for her to make a decision. "I offer you the realm of Drenya, a land beyond your understanding, where the boundaries of time and space no longer apply. But be warned, Fiona, everything comes at a price. Nothing in this world is ever truly free." Her mind raced. This was madness. She had to be dreaming. She had to be. But Cassian's eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, were full of intent, and Fiona felt a strange pull toward him, as if his very presence was calling to something deep inside her. "Drenya," she echoed, still struggling to understand. Cassian nodded, his smile never fading. "A place where you can forget, where you can leave behind everything that haunts you. But the price is steep, Fiona. The choice is yours. Accept my offer, and you will be free from the life you know. But refuse, and your wish will remain unfulfilled." Fiona stood frozen, her heart racing. The world outside her window seemed to have vanished, replaced by the strange, suffocating weight of the moment. The choice stretched out before her like a vast, endless chasm, and for the first time in years, she felt as if she could truly walk away from everything. Escape. Freedom. But at what cost? She started, with the words caught in her throat. Her mind screamed for reason, for reality, for anything that could ground her. But deep inside, there was a spark of something else, something that was drawn to Cassian's words, to the promise of a life beyond the pain. "I accept," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the words felt like a breaking of something inside her. A quiet surrender. Cassian's smile deepened, and the shadows around him seemed to pulse with life. "Then come," he said, his voice almost a command. "Let us go." And with that, the room around her vanished entirely, leaving only the darkness and the promise of something unknown. Fiona Ellwood had wished to escape, and now she was about to discover just how far that wish would take her. Chapter 2. The Stranger in the Labyrinth. Fiona's eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she had merely fallen asleep, lost in the exhaustion of a night spent in turmoil. But the chill that clung to her skin, the dampness beneath her fingertips, told a different story. She was no longer in her room, no longer in her world. The air was thick with the scent of earth, moss, and something else, something ancient, as if the very ground beneath her feet had stood for centuries watching, waiting. The sound of distant wind rustled through dense foliage, and the faint hum of an unseen force vibrated in her bones. Fiona sat up, her heart racing as she took in her surroundings. A forest. But not the kind she was familiar with. This was a place that felt alive, pulsing with energy and secrets. Towering trees loomed above her, their branches twisting at unnatural angles, creating a canopy that blocked out most of the sky. The air was heavy with mist, and the path beneath her feet wound in strange serpentine curves, vanishing into the unknown. She stumbled to her feet, panic rising in her chest. Her heart thudded, and her thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. She had asked for an escape, but this was not what she had imagined. It felt like a dream, yet it was all too real. Every breath, every step felt tangible, as if she had been transported to some otherworldly place. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. A rustling in the trees broke the silence, and Fiona's head snapped up. Her heart skipped a beat, as a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the faint light filtering through the mist. At first, she thought it was Cassian, the strange man who had offered her a choice, but this figure was different. Taller, with dark hair that seemed to move like liquid in the moonlight, and eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intensity. He wore a cloak made of dark fabric, the edges shifting as though they were part of the very night itself. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. The man moved toward her with fluid grace, his footsteps almost silent, despite the crunch of leaves beneath him. He was a stranger, someone entirely unfamiliar, Yet there was something about him that seemed both threatening and magnetic, drawing her attention in ways she couldn't fully explain. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice more forceful than she felt. The man stopped a few paces away, his gaze lingering on her with a peculiar mix of curiosity and disdain. "A question that seems fitting," he said, his voice smooth, almost melodic. "But perhaps the better question is, what are you doing here?" Fiona's pulse quickened. His tone was cold, distant, and it sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't. How did I get here? Where is this place?" His lips curled into a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Ah, a lost soul," he murmured. "I suppose that is why you're here." He tilted his head slightly, as if studying her, his eyes narrowing with an unreadable expression. "The labyrinth is no place for the uninvited. But then again, it is not often the chosen ones arrive with such confusion." Fiona blinked, trying to make sense of his words. "The labyrinth?" she echoed, the name stirring something deep inside her, something primal and ancient. It felt both alien and familiar, as if she had known it all her life but had never truly acknowledged it. The man gave a slow, almost pitying nod. "Yes. You have been brought here for a reason. For a trial, if you will. And though you may wish otherwise, the labyrinth is where you must remain until the task is done." Fiona's stomach twisted. A task. She glanced around, the mist swirling in the air, thickening as if it were alive, breathing. "I don't understand. Who are you? What is this place?" The man's expression shifted, and in that moment his eyes seemed to pierce through her, seeing everything, her fears, her doubts, her longing for escape. "I am but a guide, a stranger passing through the labyrinthine paths like so many before me. As for this place," he gestured around them, his hand sweeping over the dense, twisting woods. "It is the heart of Drenya, where the boundaries of fate are drawn. A place that shifts and changes, its paths designed to deceive and mislead, testing the resolve of those who enter." Fiona took a step back, her mind racing. She had no idea what was happening, or why she had been brought here. But the realization began to sink in slowly. This wasn't just an escape. It was a test, a trial, and her wish had brought her here for some reason she could not yet fathom. "But why me?" she whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "What do I have to do with this place? With any of this?" The stranger's smile faltered, and for the briefest moment, Fiona saw something like sympathy in his eyes. "You have yet to understand, I see," he murmured. "You are not the first to wander these paths, and you will not be the last. But you are the one chosen to complete the task, or fail." Fiona felt a surge of frustration, mixed with fear. "What task? What am I supposed to do?" The man's gaze softened, though it still held that unsettling intensity. "That I cannot tell you. The labyrinth chooses its own way, and only those who are worthy may pass its trials. But if you seek the truth you desire, the truth of why you are here, you must walk the paths and face what lies ahead. Only then will you understand." He turned, taking a step back into the shadows, his form blending with the mist as though he were part of it. Fiona's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him disappear. "Wait," she called out, her voice rising in desperation. "Who are you? What am I supposed to do?" But the stranger was gone. The silence returned, oppressive and heavy. The mist swirled in thick waves, obscuring her vision, and Fiona was left standing in the eerie stillness of the labyrinth alone. The world around her felt both foreign and familiar, as if it had always been waiting for her. A part of her wanted to turn and run, to escape back to the life she had known, back to the life that had shattered her heart. But something in her chest, deep within her soul, told her that there was no going back. She had made her choice, and now she would face the consequences. With a final glance at the place where the stranger had disappeared, Fiona took a deep breath and stepped forward, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what lay ahead in the shifting maze of Drenya, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't turn back now. The labyrinth was waiting, and she had no choice but to walk its twisted paths. And somewhere within its depths, Cassian's curse awaited her. Chapter 3: The Rules of the Game. The fog seemed to thicken with each step Fiona took, swirling around her legs like a living entity, clinging to her skin, as though the labyrinth itself was trying to pull her deeper into its grasp. The trees, twisted, gnarled, and ancient, loomed above her, their branches twisting in impossible shapes, reaching toward the sky with a kind of silent menace. Each step echoed with the hollow thud of her boots against the damp earth, the only sound in the suffocating silence that surrounded her. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of how completely she was out of her element, how utterly unprepared she felt for what lay ahead. Fiona had no idea where she was going, or what she was supposed to do, only that she was meant to traverse this strange and foreboding maze. The stranger, the man in the cloak, had said that the labyrinth was a trial, a test of sorts, but the rules of this place, the stakes, were still a mystery to her. She reached an open clearing where the mist parted, revealing an intricate stone archway, its edges cracked and weathered by the passage of time. The arch was the first sign of civilization, or perhaps more accurately, the first sign of something other than nature in this forsaken land. Fiona approached it cautiously, her senses alert for any sign of movement, any hint of danger. But the archway was not the only thing she noticed. As her eyes fell upon the stone pillars that flanked the entrance, Fiona saw that each was inscribed with ancient symbols, glowing faintly with an eerie light. They pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm, like a heartbeat that didn't quite belong to anything she knew. She reached out to touch one of the symbols, her fingers brushing the cold stone. The moment her skin made contact, a voice echoed through the air, low and melodic, yet commanding in its presence. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome to the labyrinth, Fiona Ellwood," the voice intoned, its tone reverberating through the space like the hum of an ancient bell. "I am the arbiter, and this is the first step of your trial. You must learn the rules of the game." Fiona's heart skipped a beat. The voice was so powerful, so all-encompassing, that it made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She looked around, but saw no one. There was no sign of the stranger from earlier, no hint of any other presence. Yet the voice seemed to fill the very air, pressing against her in a way that was impossible to ignore. "The rules are simple," the arbiter continued, its voice soothing yet insistent. "You are here because you made a choice, and with that choice comes responsibility. Your task is to solve the riddles that lie ahead. But beware, each choice you make will shape your fate. There are no second chances, no do-overs. Fail, and you will be trapped here forever, bound to the curse of the labyrinth. Succeed, and you may leave, your wish granted." Fiona felt a chill run down her spine. The stakes were higher than she had imagined. She had thought she was merely escaping her past, seeking solace from the heartbreak that had driven her to make that wish. But now it seemed she had stumbled into something much more dangerous. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt to keep her composure. The arbiter's voice grew softer, almost as if it were drawing her in. "You must follow the path before you. Each twist and turn brings you closer to your goal, but also closer to the heart of the labyrinth. Along the way, you will encounter riddles, puzzles that guard the way. Solve them, and you may pass. Fail, and you will be forced to start again. There are no shortcuts in this place. Time is a luxury you do not have." Fiona's throat went dry. "Time?" she echoed. "How much time do I have?" "The clock is always ticking," the arbiter replied cryptically. "But know this, the labyrinth will test you, not just your mind, but your heart. The answers you seek may not always be what you expect. What you are willing to sacrifice and what you are willing to lose will determine your fate." The air seemed to grow heavier as the last of the arbiter's words faded into silence. Fiona stood frozen, the weight of the decision bearing down on her. Her heart was racing, but the clarity of the moment was slowly settling in. This was a game, a cruel and unforgiving one, and she was its player. There were no guarantees. She had no idea what lay ahead, or if she could even trust the voice that had spoken to her. But she knew one thing for certain: she had to keep moving forward. With a final, lingering glance at the stone archway, Fiona stepped through the entrance. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the world around her shifted. The trees that had surrounded her before were now gone, replaced by towering walls of stone that stretched impossibly high. The air was thick with the scent of old, decaying parchment, and the ground beneath her feet was cold, hard, and unforgiving. She was standing in a vast courtyard, surrounded by walls that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. In the center of the courtyard stood a large stone pedestal upon which rested a single ancient tome. The book glowed faintly, as though it contained the answers to all the questions Fiona had yet to ask. But as she moved closer, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle. Something was wrong. She wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim light. The stranger, the one who had guided her here, stood before her once again, his dark eyes locked onto hers with an unsettling intensity. His cloak fluttered in the unseen wind, his presence looming over her like a shadow. "You have entered the heart of the labyrinth," he said, his voice quiet but filled with an ominous weight. "And now you must choose." Fiona's pulse quickened. Choose? Choose what? The man's smile was small, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with her. "The rules of the game are simple. Solve the riddle, and you will pass. Fail, and you will remain here, trapped forever. It's as simple as that." Fiona's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, the pressure of the situation mounting as she realized that this was no longer just a test of her mind. This was a test of her very will, her ability to face the unknown and make choices that would determine her future. The man stepped aside, revealing the tome on the pedestal. "The first riddle lies within. But be warned, the answers are not always what they seem. Choose wisely, Fiona Ellwood. The labyrinth is watching." Fiona's hand hovered over the book, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. She had entered the labyrinth for an escape, for a chance at freedom. But now it seemed the stakes had grown even higher. The rules of the game had been set. And now, it was time for her to play. Chapter 4: Echoes of Drenya. Fiona's fingers trembled as she lifted the ancient tome from its pedestal, the pages cold and brittle beneath her touch. She opened the book carefully, afraid that the fragile pages might disintegrate if she handled them too roughly. The faint glow that had illuminated the tome's cover now seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, casting strange shadows on the walls around her. The pages were covered in dense, ornate script, flowing in a language that Fiona couldn't decipher. Her gaze moved quickly across the text, trying to make sense of the swirling symbols, but it was as though the words were deliberately evasive, shifting and rearranging themselves when she focused too intently on them. Frustration bubbled up inside her. She had been given a riddle, and yet here she was, unable to even begin understanding the language of the labyrinth. She had no time to waste. The voice, the arbiter, had made that clear. "Look deeper." Fiona froze, the voice whispering in her mind like a distant echo, a sensation more felt than heard. It was familiar, too familiar. She had felt it before, in the quiet of the night when she had made her wish, the same quiet voice urging her to escape. The voice wasn't just a guide. It was a presence. Something ancient and powerful, woven into the very fabric of Drenya. "Look deeper," the voice repeated, insistent this time. Fiona's heart thudded painfully in her chest, but she nodded, drawing a shaky breath. She let the words of the tome swim in her vision, closing her eyes for a moment to clear the distractions. She wasn't sure how to explain what was happening next, how the very essence of the labyrinth seemed to speak to her through the pages, but when she opened her eyes again, the symbols had begun to shift. The book was alive. The letters wove and reshaped themselves, coming together to form coherent words, their meanings slowly becoming clear in her mind. It was as though the labyrinth had read her desperation, and was willing to offer her its help, at least for now. To walk the path of the labyrinth, you must walk through the shadows of your past. Only in facing the echoes of Drenya will you find the truth. The words burned into her mind like a brand. The echoes of Drenya. The phrase rattled around in her head, pulling at some deep inspoken part of her being. What was Drenya? What was it about this place that seemed to call to her, that felt both foreign and achingly familiar? She glanced up, and for the first time since entering the courtyard, Fiona realized that the walls were not merely stone. The stone itself seemed to be alive, pulsating with faint ghostly figures, shadows like flickers of memory flickering across the surface. It was as though the very walls were holding the history of this place and of herself. Stepping forward, Fiona reached out and touched the wall, her palm brushing against the smooth surface. The moment her skin made contact, the shadows began to swirl around her, coalescing into distinct images. She gasped as the first vision flashed before her eyes. She was no longer standing in the courtyard, but in a lush meadow bathed in golden sunlight. A younger version of herself was sitting on a stone bench, staring out over a vast calm lake, its surface reflecting the pale blue sky. She felt the familiar weight of grief settle into her chest as she saw herself, the old Fiona, the one she had once been, sitting there alone, watching life slip by. But then a figure appeared, standing at the edge of the water. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. The man's figure was tall, with dark hair that shimmered like liquid night. His eyes were distant but kind, and as he stepped toward her, there was a quiet, unspoken understanding between them. It was Cassian. She had no idea why, but the sight of him, his presence, filled her with both longing and sorrow. She wanted to move toward him, to reach out and embrace him, but the vision shifted before she could. She blinked, and the scene vanished, replaced by another. This time, Fiona stood in a darkened room, its walls lined with shelves of ancient books and scrolls. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, casting flickering shadows across the room. She was standing near a desk, her hands trembling as she opened a letter, the words too blurry for her to read, but she could feel the weight of the moment. The letter was a message, a call to action, but it was too late. Something had already been decided, and she was powerless to change it. The vision shifted again, this time to a small, crowded town square. People were shouting, their voices filled with fear and confusion. There was panic in the air. Fiona's heart pounded as she saw herself among the crowd, watching as the chaos unfolded. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite understand. It was as though the entire world was on the brink of collapsing, of shattering into pieces. And in the center of it all stood a figure, a woman whose face Fiona could not see. She stood tall and defiant, holding a shard of something broken in her hands. But just as quickly as the vision had come, it vanished, leaving Fiona breathless and disoriented. She stumbled back, her hands pressed against her temples as the images swirled around her. They were echoes, fragments of a life she had never truly understood. Pieces of her past, some of which she recognized, and others that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The echoes of Drenya, she whispered, the words carrying a weight she hadn't fully grasped until now. It wasn't just the labyrinth that was testing her, it was her own past. The shadows she had long buried were coming to life in this strange mystical realm. The pieces of her story, of her destiny, were woven into the very fabric of Drenya. Fiona stepped back, her heart racing. The vision had ended, but the sense of déjà vu lingered, pulling at her soul. There was something important here, something she had missed. Before she could fully collect herself, the voice of the arbiter spoke again, echoing in the chambers of her mind. "Those echoes are the key," it said, its tone heavy and cryptic. "The labyrinth holds the answers, but to find them, you must face the truth of your past. The riddles will not be solved by logic alone. Only by understanding the echoes of Drenya will you unlock the path forward." Fiona's mind reeled as she absorbed the weight of the voice's words. The labyrinth was more than a test of her intelligence, it was a test of her very self. Her past, her choices, her regrets, they were all here, haunting the very air she breathed. She closed the book, her resolve hardening. The echoes of Drenya were calling to her, and though the path ahead was shrouded in darkness, she knew one thing. She had to face whatever lay in the shadows if she was ever going to find her way out. And somewhere, hidden within those echoes, was the key to breaking the curse that bound her, and perhaps even to the truth of her connection to Cassian. Chapter 5. First Steps into the Unknown. The ground beneath Fiona's feet was uneven, each step a tentative move into the uncertainty that loomed ahead. The labyrinth had already begun to show its true nature, an ever-shifting maze full of traps and illusions, its walls whispering secrets, its paths offering no guarantees. The shadow of her past lingered behind her like a specter, haunting every corner of the labyrinth, waiting for her to confront it. She had closed the book, the echoes of Drenya still swirling in her mind. The cryptic words had made her realize that the labyrinth was more than a mere physical puzzle. It was a manifestation of everything she had buried, everything she had tried to escape. This place was a reflection of herself, and the riddles she would face were not just about knowledge or logic, but about uncovering truths she had long forgotten. Fiona paused at a crossroad. The stone pathways stretched out in two directions, their twists and turns vanishing into the mist that clung to the air. She could hear the faint rustle of leaves, soft whispers like a chorus of voices calling her in different directions. The path to the left was darker, the trees more densely packed, their branches intertwining above, blocking out the dim light. To the right, the path seemed clearer, bathed in a soft pale glow that might have been moonlight or something else entirely. Taking a deep breath, Fiona chose the right path. The labyrinth seemed to shift around her, the walls closing in slightly, but she forced herself not to look back. It was too early to second-guess herself. She had to keep moving forward. With each step, the quiet of the labyrinth grew more pronounced, the air thick with the weight of the unknown. She could hear her own breath, steady but quick, as if the very atmosphere was urging her to hurry, to rush through this trial. But Fiona resisted. She had made a promise to herself, back when she first entered the labyrinth, to take her time and learn from every step, no matter how hard it became. It was easy to think that this was just a physical challenge, a maze that could be solved with logic or quick thinking. But as she walked, Fiona began to sense something more profound. It was as if the labyrinth was alive, as though it were watching her, testing not just her mind but her heart. She could feel its gaze, heavy and unyielding, pressing against her every step. As she moved forward, a soft voice echoed through the trees, distant and faint, like a memory half remembered. Fiona. She froze. It was her name. The voice was unmistakable. The same voice she had heard before, deep within the walls of the labyrinth. But this time it sounded closer, more real. It felt like a whisper against her ear, and for a fleeting moment, Fiona thought she could see the outline of a figure standing just beyond the mist. But when she blinked, it was gone. Fiona, the voice whispered again. It was then that she realized the voice wasn't just calling her. It was pulling her in, beckoning her toward the shadows. Something about it felt familiar, comforting even, but at the same time there was an undercurrent of danger, something that made her hesitate. She stepped forward cautiously, her hand brushing against the stone walls. The voice had faded, but its presence remained like a shadow, trailing her every movement. As she walked deeper into the heart of the labyrinth, the air grew colder, the mist heavier. The trees above began to sway, their branches creaking like ancient bones. And then she saw it. A door. It was nothing like she had expected. No simple wooden door, but a massive stone archway, adorned with intricate carvings of swirling patterns and strange creatures. The stone glowed faintly in the dim light, casting eerie shadows on the path behind her. The door was set within the stone walls, almost as if it had always been there waiting for her. Above the arch, an inscription was etched into the stone, the words written in the same cryptic script she had seen in the book. Fiona stepped closer, her heart pounding. She could feel the weight of the labyrinth's gaze upon her, and the door seemed to beckon her with a strange magnetic pull. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold stone. The moment her skin touched the surface, a rush of memories flooded her mind, each one more vivid than the last. Faces, familiar yet distant, flashed before her eyes. The image of her mother, young and vibrant, holding her hand in a place that felt both real and unreal. The warm embrace of her father, his voice calling her name. The laughter of friends, long gone, from a time when life seemed simpler. But just as quickly as the images came, they were gone, replaced by a sharp, biting pain, a feeling of loss, of something she could never get back. The faces blurred, the voices fading into nothingness, leaving behind only the echo of their absence. Fiona pulled her hand away, breathless. The door before her was no ordinary door. It was a gateway to something deeper, something that lay hidden within the labyrinth and within herself. She knew, instinctively, that this was no random obstacle. It was a test. The labyrinth was offering her a choice. She hesitated, torn between the path ahead and the knowledge that whatever lay beyond this door might force her to confront the very thing she had been running from her whole life, her past. But in that moment, she knew one thing. She couldn't move forward without understanding her own history, without facing the darkness she had hidden deep inside. With a steadying breath, Fiona placed her hand back on the stone, feeling its cool surface against her skin. The door groaned as if waking from a long slumber, the heavy stone shifting beneath her fingers. Slowly, the door began to open, revealing what lay beyond. A vast chamber stretched before her, its walls lined with mirrors that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. The reflections that stared back at her weren't just her own. They were faces from her past, moments she had long buried beneath the weight of time and regret. But as Fiona stepped into the chamber, the mirrors began to change. Her reflection morphed, shifting before her eyes. She saw herself as a child, laughing in a garden, her mother's voice calling her name. Then she saw herself as a young woman, standing alone in a crowd, her heart heavy with the weight of loss. The reflections grew darker, the faces more distorted. The echoes of her past became twisted, distorted by time and pain. The girl she had once been, the woman she had become, they all seemed to merge into one, trapped in a web of memories and regrets. And in the center of it all, there was a figure, tall and imposing, a shadow that seemed to watch her every move. The figure was familiar yet distant, its features blurred by the reflections of her own face. Cassian. Fiona's heart skipped a beat. She knew, in that moment, that the journey ahead wasn't just about solving the riddles of the labyrinth. It was about understanding the ties that bound her to this place, and to him. To uncover the truth of her past, and to face the choices she had made, and the ones she had yet to make. As she stepped further into the chamber, the shadows deepened, and the mirrors shimmered with the reflections of the woman she was meant to be. The path ahead was shrouded in mystery, but Fiona knew one thing: there was no turning back. She was ready to face whatever lay beyond the veil of mirrors. Her first steps into the unknown had begun.